Could you just give a quick background on the languages you speak, what your strongest languages are, and why you speak them?
Okay, so in sort of declining order of proficiency, after English, it would be French, then Japanese, then Mandarin, then Spanish, then probably Swedish, German, Italian, Portuguese, Cantonese, Russian, Ukrainian. I don't know what I left out there. Those are kind of the stronger ones that I could actually easily carry on a conversation in. And then I have, that should amount to about 12. And then I have another 8 that I have, see, I started learning Russian when I was 60. And after Russian, I learned Ukrainian and Czech and Polish. But today I would struggle to speak Czech or Polish. But I was in Czech Republic speaking it quite comfortably, but I just haven't spent any time on it. And similarly with Greek and Romanian, Korean, I always want to get back there and improve in Korean, but I'm not great, but I'm okay.
Welcome. It's an honor today to have almost like a hero / mentor without, I don't think he's even known it since 2007. I remember the first time that I opened up Steve Kaufmann's blog back then in 2007. And I was just starting out then on the internet too, and I followed everything Steve did back then. Anything he put out there, I'd be wanting to read it and learn about it, and it inspired me to go ahead. So thank you very much, Steve, for being part of this. And
well, I would say it's very mutual because I've been following you obviously for the same amount of time, and I've just been so impressed with your linguistic skills and inquisitive mind and all those things. So it's been mutual.
There's a little community from way back around 2007ish that included Moses, bless his soul. And I think Benny was coming up around then.
Luca.
Yep, Luca. And so
Richard Simcott.
Richard Simcott. There are a whole bunch of them that were coming up around then, and it's amazing that everyone's still around today. Sadly, Moses passed away.
That's amazing. Yes,
I have wanted to talk to you for so long, Steve, and actually in Fukuoka, I had to leave early because I had to come back for a client, and I walked past you in the corridor of the university as I was rushing out to get out. I'd just done my session, and I think you just arrived in from Canada. So sadly, we weren't actually. So I've actually been in your presence, but we never spoke.
Right. Okay.
But anyway, Steve, it's awesome to have you here. Could you just give a quick background on the languages you speak, what your strongest languages are, and why you speak them?
Okay, so in sort of declining order of proficiency, after English, it would be French, then Japanese, then Mandarin, then Spanish, then probably Swedish, German, Italian, Portuguese, Cantonese, Russian, Ukrainian. I don't know what I left out there. Those are kind of the stronger ones that I could actually easily carry on a conversation in. And then I have, that should amount to about 12. And then I have another 8 that I have, see, I started learning Russian when I was 60. And after Russian, I learned Ukrainian and Czech and Polish. But today I would struggle to speak Czech or Polish. But I was in Czech Republic speaking it quite comfortably, but I just haven't spent any time on it. And similarly with Greek and Romanian, Korean, I always want to get back there and improve in Korean, but I'm not great, but I'm okay. And then the languages that I've learned recently, and surprisingly, I think I do fairly well in Farsi because it's actually quite easy, whereas I struggle in Arabic because it's more difficult, and I'm trying to learn both Egyptian Arabic and Standard Arabic, so there's a lot of interference and confusion. I did some Turkish. Turkish, while it's a different language system because it's written in the Latin alphabet, it ends up being easier because I rely on reading to learn languages, reading and listening, and it's always more difficult to read in a script that you're not used to. So I spent my life reading in the Latin script, so that's always going to be easier for me. But those would be the languages, basically.
Wow, fantastic. Yeah, I love Farsi, and with Farsi, you get like Tajik and all these other languages as a bonus.
Exactly. Afghanistan, I see these women protesters in Kabul, and I can understand what they're saying. You know?
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. And so first of all, because I've been learning Slavic languages over recent months. I'm loving it. I started off with Russian. For our wedding, a friend of ours gave me a copy of this very old book, Napoleon, that she picked up from Moscow. She flew in. We got married in France. And so she flew in and she said, here, I hope you can read this soon. And I didn't speak a word of Russian. So I started off in Russian, but then I got into Old Church Slavonic, which then led me into Slavic, and then seeing how close the Slavic languages were. The thing that threw me was actually the Latin alphabet, because I started with Cyrillic in Russian, and it was actually became easier to separate the sounds. I think I mentioned, we just did a clip, by the way, on Steve's channel, but we spoke about in Minecraft, we're looking at the links of Sanskrit and Russian and how close they are, and even the sound systems. Do you find it easier to read Slavic languages in the Cyrillic script, or do you still prefer the Latin?
No, Latin. I have read so much Russian in Cyrillic, and of course Ukrainian is in Cyrillic. But if I can get a hold of something in Czech, it's just so much easier. I just find that I can just it's Czech or Polish. It's just a Czech more so than Polish, because in Polish they got their C, Z, Z's, all kinds of complicated consonants grunged together. So no, I prefer to read in the script. It's the same with Turkish versus Farsi. Farsi would probably be easier because it's an Indo-European language, but because I have to read it in the Arabic script, it's just a further obstacle. Whereas Turkish, I can read it in the Latin alphabet. So I find it easier. But to me, I never worry much about what's easy. It's like, what am I in the mood to do,
And so this comes into like easy. You learned Chinese a long time ago. Could you just give me a bit of background on how you came to learn Chinese?
I joined the Canadian diplomatic service in 1967, and I was assigned to Hong Kong to learn Mandarin Chinese. That was my job, because Canada was getting ready to recognize the People's Republic of China. And so I spent a year. Most people took 2 years, but I went at it with far more intensity than most. Most relied on their teacher, and they had drills in class and stuff. And I just read copiously. I'd go to the bookstore and I'd look for books where you had like a glossary behind each chapter, and I was just devouring this stuff and building up my ability to read characters and listening and listening to stuff over and over again. And I remember when we started, we had this thing called we used the Yale and China system, and they had these Chinese dialogues that were spoken so quickly, and I was convinced that the narrator was on purpose speaking quickly so that we would get annoyed or something. But after a while, you get used to it. And then they had books on Chinese history and simplified to 1,000 characters, 2,000 characters, and I just devoured all this stuff. And at the end of the year, I wrote the British Foreign Service exam, which required you to translate newspaper editorials from English to Chinese, from Chinese to English, write a diplomatic letter, and a whole bunch of stuff. But I went at it really heavy, like 6-7 hours a day.
Fantastic.
I hardly took any time off it.
I put a clip out recently on handwriting in Chinese, because I learned and I develop, in any language I do too, but I'll really pay attention to handwriting just to get something into my muscles. And so since I was a kid, and so I write, my Chinese style is like a 行书, is like the in between full cursive and it's like a semi-cursive style, which is normal writing style, say for a generation ago.
Yeah.
I've heard though, even since I put this clip out on basics of writing 行书, even native Chinese speakers are losing the ability to write because of WeChat texting. Your writing style in Chinese from back then, did you pay a lot of attention to the actual handwriting?
No. I have to confess, I took a very sort of utilitarian approach. I would write out characters as I was learning them. We had to write, so I had to write, we had sentences and we had eventually things, we had to compose stuff in Chinese. So I wrote because I had to write. My writing was always very ugly. I didn't pay much attention to it. Since then, I lived in Japan for 9 years, did a lot of business in Japan. I'm more fluent in Japanese than Chinese. I never, ever write in Japanese. Never write in Russian. Never write in any of these languages because I'm so focused on input, on enjoying new things in the language, and writing just slows me down. But that's not to say that it isn't a good thing to do. I think so much in language learning depends on what you enjoy doing, what you're interested in doing, what your goals are. So it's not that I don't think writing is a good thing to do, but I just find that it's not a big priority for me. And the fact that I lived in Japan for 9 years, did business there, and I can write with a word processor or computer or whatever, but to write by hand, no. And of course, my Chinese writing skills, if you don't continue writing your Chinese, it's gone, okay? Not completely gone, but you end up, whereas I used to be able to write, let's say, 4,000 characters, I would be hard-pressed to write 50 today. And that's even true of my wife, who went to school and everything, but now it's just so hard. You have to write all the time. You lose that quickly. I mean, you might get it back quickly too, but you lose it, yeah.
I think I'm lucky in facilitating in Chinese and languages around here. When you're facilitating, you use flip charts and a lot of brainstorming and stuff. So you actually have to, sure. As people are saying stuff, you have to write it down. So I get a bit spoiled being able to keep it there. But that's an amazing thing to keep the language up as well, because you have to make sure you're on point as they're calling it out and do it. I love writing, but I can see there's a decline in actually needing to write. Like you can get through life without having to actually write a single letter with a pen. So that's it. So let me go back to, because for me, language is life. It's work, it's business, it's the life that I live. And the way that I speak the language, especially living on the ground here in Asia, has a direct influence on the way people interact with me, people accept me, and even how I live my life. How was the language? Was there a difference when you use the language in your business, especially when you're in the foreign service? Did you get treated differently to your peers who didn't have the same level of expertise in the language?
Well, when I learned Chinese, and then for a period thereafter, it was, the Cultural Revolution in China, you had less opportunity to really interact with Chinese people. You were a diplomat, you had, you were treated, if you were a Westerner, you went to this hotel. If you were Japanese, you went to some other hotel. I mean, everything was contrived. There was nothing natural or spontaneous, right? In Japan, it's totally different. So obviously, if you speak Japanese, there are a lot of people that you can interact with that are not available to you if you only speak English. That's both in a personal, from a social point of view, and also from a business point of view. If you only speak English, you can only deal with the large corporations. At least that was the case in those days. I don't know what the story is right now, but in those days, those business people who only spoke English had to deal with the large trading companies, Mitsubishi, Mitsui, and so forth. Whereas, because I spoke Japanese, I had contacts in small towns, lumber wholesalers, newspaper journalists, whatever. I mean, there was no limit to whom I could interact with because I spoke the language. But insofar as being treated differently, I find that once you speak the language at a certain level, they just accept it. It's just, okay, Steve speaks Japanese, so he's one of us, or he's, they just, interact with you in a certain way. They don't necessarily like you better. I mean, they might like another Canadian who only speaks English, but who's a nice guy and cracks jokes, or who's a very good businessman and always delivers on his promises, and so they like dealing with him. But that just becomes a part of who you are. They know that they can speak to you in a certain way that they can't speak to some other person who can't speak Japanese.
Yeah, I think this, and I get why. I've put some clips out recently where I sort of take a stab at certain people on YouTube who get the clickbait, native speakers shocked when white guy speaks fluent whatever. And for me, that's just cringy, because actually, if you're speaking the language perfectly, no one's going to be shocked. And the best reaction you can get is zero reaction. My grandfather used to tell me, if they compliment you... Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say absolutely. So say that here, I'm used to the fact that a lot of our recent immigrants from China don't speak English very well. But if a guy comes along who speaks it very well and practically has no accent, at first you're pleasantly surprised, but then after a while, that's just who he is. That's just, you cease to be surprised that there's no great achievement. Well, it's, in a way, it's an achievement, but it's not a great, wow, Chinese guy speaks fluent English. That's no, I don't see that. I think
I named the clip, I introduced it as, Asian chick orders hamburger in perfect Chinese, my wife. And you just wouldn't get that in the West. But, why is it such a clickbaity thing? I get it. YouTube rewards this kind of stuff. But it's just sad if language stays within this container where it's exotic and everything. I want to get it to a point where it's just normal. That
And I'll tell you, I don't find the Chinese don't go overboard just because you speak Chinese, because there's more and more people who speak Chinese. I get the biggest rise out of Farsi speakers, Iranians here in Vancouver. They're the most delighted when you speak their language, okay? Because it's so uncommon. But it's more fun. That's one of the reasons I left Arabic to go and learn Farsi, because they're so pleased when you speak their language.
Sorry about that. I just lost my earpiece.
Yeah.
Could you say that about the Arabic speakers again?
Well, no, because I started into Arabic, and there aren't many Arabic speakers in Vancouver, but there's lots of Farsi speakers, people from Iran. And when I started, I got to the level where I could, and we have a lot of them. You can't go into a store without finding, a clerk or someone. And my doctor's Iranian, and they're pharmacists, and you name it. And if you speak them in Farsi, they're just amongst the most appreciative people when you speak their language that I've come across.
I got to give Farsi a workout. My wife and I, back 11 years ago, we worked in people smuggling missions where we'd go and try and help victims of people smuggling gangs to get them out of prison, who were the mules. And so sitting in court, a lot of them were these Iranian Hazaragi gangs that would smuggle the people. And so we were listening to testimonies, and then Gam is my wife, we would travel through Southeast Asia following the trails of these gangs to collect evidence so we could get these kids released from prison in Australia. But then that was the time, and you realize actually how close they are. Like, it's more politics, whether it's Tajik or it's Iranian, or it's more politics that separate the language than actual linguistic differences.
Well, not just, because don't forget the Iranians are Shia.
Well,
and the Afghans are Sunni, and I think the Tajiks, I don't know them as well, but I think they're Sunni as well. And there's a lot of history there too. There's a lot of history.
But linguistically, it's mutually intelligible. If you, I guess, if you used to
the people in let's say roughly 40% of the Afghans speak Farsi and 50% speak Pashto. The Farsi that I hear from Afghanistan, I understand it perfectly. It sounds exactly the same as Iran. I haven't heard people from Tajikistan, so I can't comment.
Yeah, the main thing is like the Cyrillic, but if you look at it, there's actually surprisingly quite a number of Tajiks here. There are a lot of models that come out to Bangkok and do their modeling, and they're Tajik, lots from this part of the world. And they can actually communicate together. I would like to get more into that. I got more into the Farsi, but there's actually a big community of Thais married to Iranians. And there's a whole Iranian district here in Bangkok where they actually run classes.
Huh.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's amazing what you get in this part of the world.
Mm-hmm. And every part of the world, actually.
Yeah. So
people move.
Could you LingQ? You've had it for a long time. Could you describe LingQ in a nutshell?
Well, because my approach to language learning is very much input based, and so long before we had LingQ, I'd have books here, German, Spanish, and I'd read, and every page had 10 words that I didn't know, and I'd look them up and make a list and forget the list and never got anywhere. And so once I became aware of, online dictionaries and MP3 files and all that kind of technology, we sort of put a system together which made it easier to learn from input and to access anything that's on the internet. It could be newspaper articles, it could be, YouTube video, Netflix movies, and to convert that into lessons where you have text and audio, so you can take the audio away and listen whenever you want, and you can look up the words and save them to flashcards, and there's sort of differential highlighting. There's a whole bunch of functionality that helps you to learn from that. So that's sort of the core, and I can't get into a lot of detail, but I find it very satisfying. I have everything I need sort of at my fingertips. And if I'm in the car, and it tracks how much you listen, it tracks how many words you've learned. If you bring something new in, it tells you how many words there are new or unknown to you, at least insofar as the system is concerned, because you haven't seen them before. And so it just becomes a pleasant, convenient place to learn languages. We have tutors as well, but that's not a big part of it. It's mostly sort of powering up your input-based learning, which is therefore listening and reading and growing your vocabulary to take advantage of whatever is available on the internet. And I happen to believe that vocabulary is the key. Like, some people say, you got 1,000 words, you can manage fine. I have never found that to be the case. I found that you actually need a lot of words. And since the sort of frequency of words declines very, very quickly, it becomes quite difficult to expand your vocabulary, and you end up having to do a lot of listening and reading in order to build up that, familiarity with the language and vocabulary. And so that's what LingQ essentially.
That's fantastic. Well, a couple of comments on that. I totally agree. Like those people that say you only need 1,000 words to jump in. Okay, that's great if you want to go and stalk people in, food courts in Middle America. Right. But if you're actually going to use the language, you need vocab. And you don't, and that's really using the language. And the other thing is, in general, I don't like apps. I love tech. And in Minecraft, we teach how to use tech, but it's all about building your own resources. And it sounds like LingQ is basically a tool to do that, which is phenomenal. Because so then you can build what you want.
We have a lot of stuff. We have a lot of stuff in there, like a lot of beginner material with a lot of sort of repetitive use of high frequency verbs, which kind of gets you launched. But as soon as you can, you should be moving away from that and going after stuff that's of interest to you and bringing it in and taking advantage of the same functionality with stuff that's of interest to you. And it's been shown that familiarity and interest in a subject is going to help you understand it much, much better than theoretically studying word lists or any of this other stuff.
Do you have Thai in there?
So we don't have Thai, but we rely on sort of our members or volunteers to do what we call our 60 mini stories, which is our core thing with the high frequency verbs. If people volunteer to translate and record these, and these are the same across all languages, 40 languages. So you can look at a translation in your own language while you're learning. So we have volunteers that have done 20 of the 60 in Thai. We had someone complete 60 of these mini stories in Urdu. So we're now putting up a new version. Once we've got sort of completed LingQ 5.0, we'll upload Urdu, Tagalog. We may have Vietnamese, I'm not sure, but these are all projects that are ongoing. But we won't put it up until we have that. You got to have something there. If a person signs up to learn Vietnamese and there's hardly anything there, he's going to feel cheated, right? So we have to have a sort of a minimum, critical mass of content. So with that, I think Thai is not yet there, but in Asian languages, we have Gujarati, for example.
That's crazy. You got Gujarati, but not Hindi yet.
Not Hindi. Nobody has given us Hindi. Because we're not going to pay to do all these languages because very few people study them.
Yeah, and this is the key. It has to make business sense. Like, I take my hat off to Mike Campbell. Whatever anyone thinks about Classica and those, but for Mike to do, and Mike's been a friend for a long time, to go and put his money where his mouth is into the most minority languages and get down. If you've read like the IPA analyses of how it's delivered, it's insanely like accurate and intricate. For him to invest in that, no other investor would do that. But Mike's gone and done it, and I think what he's actually produced is a service to the planet because it's going to help preserve these languages. Does it make business sense? I can't imagine how he'd be making money on some of the languages there. But it's awesome that he's actually done that, I think.
Sure. We pursue things that are meaningful to us.
Yeah. So anyway, thank you so much, Steve. It's
not at all.
It's wonderful to finally have you here. And and also, if for my listeners, go and check out the interview that we did on Steve's side. So could you tell where can they see you on YouTube?
Okay, so I have my YouTube channel is called Lingo Steve. LingQ, of course, is lingq.com. So those would be the two places to go and find me. I don't know when I'm not in charge of when our interview will go up, but I think it'll go up fairly soon, like within a week or so, I would imagine. And that would be at Lingo Steve, which is my YouTube channel. Okay, Steve. Well, I hope this isn't the last time we get to talk, and hopefully after COVID we can cross paths face to face and actually talk. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thanks, Sounds Steve. Good. Bye-bye. Okay. Thank you, Stu. Bye-bye.